is the server we're going to use. So the server's always running in that case. But when you're working locally, starting that database server here, this is a manual process to get. I mean, I think you can run it as a server on your operating system, always running, and you don't have to do it. But really, do you really want MongoDB running all the time on your machine, using up resources? Probably not. Okay. So we're back with hour 3. So we've got the ability to read articles, and we can add new articles here. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're now going to have to come back to our links, so that when we click on any article, we need to add a root handler for this. We'll want to display a form, and we'll want to populate the form. Then we want to let our user be able to save changes or also delete the article. So we'll have a few things we need to do. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of the 404. So where are we going to have to go to tell the application what to do when we get a request that looks like this? /articles/ with an ID. Right now, Node has no idea what to do with this type of request. So remember, when we handled these, we said we were doing 3 things. What type of request is running here when I click one of these links? Yeah, so we need a GET request. So let's set up GET handler or edit to show the populated form. We're going to run a GET request. So the URL we're going to handle, because that value is going to change every time, this indicates, we want to indicate this is a parameter. Every article I click has a different value. So to indicate that this is a variable in the URL, we're going to put it in as a colon, and we're going to name it ID. So this is kind of the PHP equivalent. The equivalent of PHP is having ID equals and then a value. And now we'll need our callback. We will create an ID variable, store the ID from the URL. I'll just create a variable called ID. Now, if this is PHP, we'd use $_get. The syntax in Node, I think, is a lot more clear. We're going to use request.params.id. So whatever we call it, however we define it in the root, that's how we pull it out. So this is the equivalent of get $_get ID in PHP, or request.queryString ID in ASP.NET. So now we want to look up the selected article. So we can use Mongoose for this. We used article.find here, and this gave us a list of everything in the collection. So what we want to call is the method find by ID. So now we pass in our ID variable, the parameter. So this is the ID we want to look up. It generates, in effect, the equivalent of an SQL where clause. And then we're going to get one of 2 things back. So we're going to have another callback function run. When we call find by ID, we're either going to get back an error, or we're going to get back one document that matches that ID. So we want a callback function. We might get an error, or we might get an article back. If we get an error, let's log it. And print it to the page. We could do that. And Mongoose has returned to us the right article. What should we do now? Yes, what do we want to display? Okay. So let's render a view. So we're going to show articles, edit. Let's try it like this first. We'll have to add a couple things, but if we don't get an error, we're going to want to show a page called Articles Edit. If we get an error, that error should get printed to the screen. Yeah, so let's go ahead. In fact, to keep it simple, our edit page is going to be almost identical to our ad, except the values will be populated. Copy everything in my articles ad, and I'll make a new EJS view inside of articles. I'll just call edit. Paste it in. So for now, it's just going to load the blank form. We'll deal with populating the form in a minute. So we're going to look for an ID. If we find one, we'll store it in a variable, and then we'll use that ID and our model to query the database and see if we can find a matching document. If we find one, we'll load our edit view. If we don't, we'll show an error. I'm just going to try this out. So I'll go and click on any article. Okay, so I didn't get 404. Our application knew what to do with the get handler at that request. Why did I get this error? What's it telling us? Our error message is in pretty bold letters here. Why did I get title is not defined? So it's loading edit.ejs. What value do we have to be passing to that view that we didn't pass it? Notice here's our articles ad. When we did a get request on our ad form, what value are we passing? Title. Yeah, we need to pass a title to the page. So when on add, it says add a new title. Maybe here, we'll say title can be, because it's already an existing article, rather than the page title saying add a new article, the page title can say article details. So this should make that error go away, and now our page should load. It's going to be blank. Our form will be empty, but it should load. So now my browser tab says article details and my view is loading. So we'll need to do two more things in order that this form is not blank. So now I should click on any article. Our root handler works and it displays the right view. I guess for consistency, I'll keep that in single quotes. So we've queried the database. We didn't get an error. Actually, I'm curious what happens if I change this ID. We have an error handler. Is it me or did they just put the air conditioning on in here? Yeah. Okay. So we actually got an error. My query fails if I don't pass in a valid ID. I think I've crashed it. I may have to restart it now. So there's something maybe wrong here. You mean even with a valid ID or with an invalid one?
Like everything's just crashing.
Did you try an invalid ID? I did, and then I had to restart. So if our query works, what we get back is an object or a variable that we've called article. So now we have this value in our root, but we need to pass it to our view because we don't want a blank form. We want a form with all the right values in it. So this article object on line 55, this article variable I have here, this contains the values that we need. So along with passing a title to the view, we also want to pass our article that we got back from the database. I'm going to add into my root file this code in blue. Give the view a title and also pass the data back to it so we can populate the form values. Now, if I refresh, we won't see any change on my form, but if I just refresh and I make sure I get no error, that's good. So now we're going to need to go to our edit.ejs. How can I populate? This is kind of similar to what we would do in a PHP form. How do we populate our title on line 8? So that that box isn't blank. You mean the ID attribute here? Yeah. Or the ID value from the database? Yep, so we want to populate, so this value, you know, when I click it's 10:03, this box should say it's 10:03. So what would I need to do here in order to inject that server-side value? Yep. Okay, and what attribute do we set at the text box? No, we've already got the ID. How do we put that text in the box? Which property? Scott's rolling over.
Placeholder?
No. Yes, you need to set the value attribute. And now, yes, Mackenzie, we are going to output here article.title. There's our server-side value. We did this in PHP. We wrote value equals PHP echo $title. This is the EJS equivalent. We're injecting our server-side value right into that form control. If we save this, now our title shows up. We need to do the same with text area with our content, although obviously the text area doesn't have a value property. So in between the opening and closing, let's just output article dot content. So I want to wrap it. Now, we didn't have a space for the date. We can display the date just on the page in a control, but it shouldn't be editable. It doesn't need to be editable. So maybe under here, I'll just put on well, for the moment, I just output it. So we can also output article dot created. That doesn't look very good. I'll just put it in a div for the moment. So at least it shows. That's probably good enough. So there's our view. We need to change one more thing on here. If I hit the submit button right now, what's going to happen with the code as it is? Why is it going to create a new one? You're right. Because what URL does it post to? It posts to add. Our application is set up. When we get a post request at /add, it's set up to save a new record. So how can we adjust this? What should we change on the form so it doesn't do this? We don't want to add a new record here if the user clicks save. What URL should this post to instead? Yeah, let's post it to edit, and we'll write a separate post handler for edit. It isn't going to run an insert, it's going to run an update instead. So there's our edit form. If I refresh it now, what's going to happen when I click save? Okay, well, I haven't changed anything, so that's true. Well, that's what we wanted to do. Have we written any code to do that? What we are going to get an error. What error am I going to get when I click save? I'm going to get 404, right? We've told the application how to handle a GET request at this URL, but we haven't set up any post handler. So when I click save, not found, right? It's the same URL. One other thing to note. Notice our parameter went away. So we're probably going to want to put our ID parameter on the end of our form action. We want to keep the ID. Now in PHP, we would stick the ID in a hidden field. We could do that as well. The easiest thing is let's actually append on right here. So that way the URL will be the same. When we do the post, we still have the article ID in the URL. So now it will post to the exact same URL. The post and get will run on the exact same URL. So I've added this on to the end of my form action, what you see in blue. So I'll refresh. At least it's going to the same URL. The page hasn't changed. Whoops. Yes, it has. We don't actually need to go to /edit, right? We don't have /edit here. Just see if I need this slash here. We'll have to make sure we get it right. Articles. Oops, I've lost my /articles. Maybe that's the URL. Rather than edit, we want articles/ID. Yes, I think that's right, because that's our get handler is get/ID. So we want the same. I'll get it right one of these times. I haven't quite found what we want. There. Sorry about that. So all we need, we're already inside of articles, so we just need our article ID as the action. So now we need a post handler for articles/ID. And we can do an update, and we can take the user back to the list of articles, and our update should run. Hopefully this will work when we do our route handling. If we have to change it a little bit, we will. So now we can write a post handler at this same URL. So now we need a post handler for edit to update the article. If we get a post handler with an ID, we'll write our callback. Once again, we'll grab the ID from our URL. So that'll be the same. I'm just going to copy and paste that. Create an ID variable and set it equal to request.parameters.id. So this colon indicates that that value is a parameter. So what we need to do is use our model, populate the values from our form, and then we'll try to call save. In fact, there's an update method we can call. We'll fill the article object. I'm going to create an instance of an article, and we'll set our properties. So our title comes from our request body. Oh, I guess I want to pass this in as well. I should set the ID. Our ID comes from the URL, and the title and content come from our form. So now we'll use Mongoose and our model to update. So we'll call article dot, just like it had a create method, it had a find, it has a find by ID, it has an update method. So we'll call update. We've got to specify the ID value. Oops, sorry. We're going to pass in our article that we created on line 76, so it has all the new values. And then we have a callback function. So this syntax is slightly different. Whoops. I missed, that's a JSON array. So it looks something like this. Call update, pass in the ID, pass in the article that has all the properties, and also a callback in case we get an error. So this line of code is going to try to run our update. If we have an error, we'll log it and end our response. If our update works, what should we do after we've saved that change? Yes, of course, Rich, we should redirect back to the articles page. So we'll use response.redirect. And go back to articles. So our code's not quite as light as with the insert. It's a little more because we have to set up this object and populate it, as well as set up the ID and pass both the ID and that object. With create, we had a simpler time. We just called article.create and we could just inject the form values right in there.
Updating it maintains the same ID.
Yes. Yeah. So the ID will not get changed. Right. So we're pulling it out of the URL, storing it in a variable. And when we call update, we're providing this is the ID, this is the record we want to update. And here is the object that contains all of the new values. So the ID won't get changed. So let's see what happens if we run this. So if I go back to my articles. If I save, my title got changed. And my content got changed too. And we've redirected.
My table isn't populating properly. It's bringing in like the whole form.
Can you clarify that a bit for me, please?
So the title doesn't populate, but the content populates and it just has like field set, button, class.
So that's probably just an issue with your HTML. Something's probably opened and not closed. You've got a bracket or tag not closed, so it's running them together. It's not distinguishing the controls properly. You could be missing, Kaylee. I suggest one possibility is this closing quote might be missing, which would mean that value is all running together. Okay, take a careful look. We didn't get to doing delete today, there is a remove method of Mongoose that we can call, where again, we just pass in an ID and it will run the remove. So we'll maybe do that after reading week. So I'm going to leave this as it is for now. I can put the other code back up if anybody needs to see the root file. I'm seeing nods, so I'll put that back up. So we're 3/4 of the way there. The only CRUD piece that's missing is delete, which is the simplest of all to do. We can just do a delete and redirect. So we can add that feature later on. So what we're going to be doing after reading week is, I mean, you have a couple of weeks now. So if you don't have your application up and running, you can email me, or I'm around next week. You can certainly come in and get help so that you have a working copy of this application for starting after reading week. I mean, I'm trying to find the balance of not leaving people behind and troubleshooting your problems, but obviously I can't spend the whole class troubleshooting problems. I'm trying to find the right balance here. Okay. So after reading week, we'll do delete, and then we're going to spend 2 classes adding authentication. So there's an NPM package called Passport that we're going to use. Basically, in our first lesson after reading, we're going to set up the user management piece so we can register and create users and manage users. And then we will add the password protection in 2 weeks. We'll do that. So we'll take 6 full hours to do it, which should be plenty of time. And then the other things we have remaining are several classes to deal with Angular.js. We also will have some classes where you guys are kind of teaching mini lessons in groups, each for an hour of class. And I'll give you a bunch of topics and you'll be able to choose. Now, just looking at the schedule for the class for a minute, I just want to open the syllabus. We have a couple of options in terms of timing for that part. I think I may have mentioned this earlier. Oh, my